Is it offensive to imply that blindness is a disability? It is a disability. Your eyes, which once can see, are no longer able to do so. Hence your eyes are disabled. Needing glasses is considered a disability, but it's something that's widely accommodated for, so people do not consider it to be a disability. A disability is something that hinders your day-to-day life. I'm no expert, but I think being blind hinders your day-to-day life. It seems to me that she just wanted to be offended by something. WTF, how isn't it a disability? Deafness is too. Which I heard, nope. Quote closing parenthesis dot. No, WTF? Tell that girl to suck eggs. Nah, she's being hypersensitive. This is something that would happen in a morality tale or on Black Mirror or Twilight Zone. Karmic retribution is a very common story ending. I'm blind in one eye and can legally draw disability, so I'd imagine being blind in both eyes would also count as a disability. It is absolutely a disability and is recognized as such by healthcare systems and the government. Some people get offended by anything. Even more so, some people like to get offended over things that don't impact them. Just because they're offended doesn't mean you have to care. I'm a little confused by your initial question. In what way are you implying that blindness is a disability? I mean, it is, by definition, but I don't see anywhere in the conversation where she said it was offensive because you were implying it was a disability. There are several ways in which this story touches on sensitive issues. But again, it's not because you are implying that blindness is a disability. Here are the reasons your story might be offensive, depending how you handle it. 1. You are playing into the trope of the exceptional, disabled person. Or your character is, which is problematic for the way society views the average unexceptional disabled person. But you could also address this in the way you frame the story, highlighting this issue in a more helpful way. 2. You could unintentionally imply that disabled people aren't to be trusted when describing their own experiences, because there's a chance they might be lying to impress people. 3. Your main character is morally repulsive. I'm not sure you can do anything to make it more palatable. 4. Using a disability as a punishment is pretty offensive, although I can see the karma in this specific case. 5. Your setup might imply that blind or disabled people ought to be pitied. People usually don't like to be pitied, and it can be really dehumanizing. So that would be offensive. 6. I find the premise unbelievable. It seems unlikely that a blind man would be painting, often a visual activity, and no one would challenge him on his vision or lack thereof. 7. The idea that feigning a disability is a kind of cheat code to success is insulting to people who have real disabilities, whose real-world experiences with others often involve neither sympathy nor awe. It's unrealistic and fantastical and reinforces inaccurate stereotypes. Sounds like a story that needs to be written, even if it was only to have exactly this discussion. In my opinion, this girl is the type who gets offended by proxy. Don't ask her, ask blind people. Your title doesn't really match what you're asking. Nobody in the story implies that blindness isn't a disability. Blindness is a disability. Yes. That's not offensive. It's just a fact. Blind people might choose to refer to themselves as disabled or not. And you should always respect their individual choices around how they identify. However, there is something a little offensive about implying there's something special about a person because they're blind. People have a tendency to treat disabled people as these heroic, brave souls and heap praise on them when they're simply living life with the hand they're dealt. Like when someone walks up to a person in a wheelchair and tells them they're inspirational. It's just a bit yucky and awkward. Now, that doesn't mean your idea in itself was offensive. It's a work of fiction. I get that. But I'm just letting you know that if you think of disabled people as being special, it does kind of undermine them as people. So maybe it was your phrasing that rubbed this girl the wrong way? Just something to keep in mind. I know it might feel like this girl is looking for problems where there aren't any. But she is probably coming at it with good intentions. Perhaps she has a blind family member or friend that she's trying to be mindful of. She might have experienced things that have made her think twice about how she views disability. Ultimately, this is the kind of thing that honest communication will solve. And it's not as simple as asking, "Is this offensive?" Just try to remember that disabled people aren't props or inspirations. They're just people. If you keep that at the heart of your work, I think you'll be okay. Make him lose the use of his hands instead. This girl just wants to bitch. There's nothing inherently offensive about the plot of your story. By definition, blindness is a disability. If someone overcomes it, it doesn't mean they don't have the disability, it means they are not controlled by it. It's really not cool for someone to pretend they have a disability. I mean, I'm not blind, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But I follow a lot of disabled content creators and my aunt is legally blind. And well, from everything I've ever heard or been told or done research on, as well as what I feel is common sense. But I want to note that a lot of people's first assumptions about a disabled community are not necessarily correct. A lot of people assume deaf people can't drive. People in wheelchairs can't walk. Blind people can't use technology, etc. And none of those are inherently true for everyone. Most blind people consider it a disability. Vision is a primary sense for humans and is one of the main ways we navigate through the world, rather than any of our other senses. Not being able to do so to any significant extent is typically very limiting to at least some degree and is medically and legally considered a disability. As far as whether it's appropriate to use becoming disabled as a punishment, no clue. I know some folks are actually not a fan of that trope, and feel if nothing else disability is put in a negative light enough that they don't love when even more content adds on to that pile. You know what I mean? But I also know some people don't care. The reality is that most people would be very unhappy or even devastated if they lost their vision. A significant portion of the population will at least some point in their lifetime to some degree. I know personally I wear glasses, but a pretty low prescription. And I would honestly be pretty devastated personally. I'm pre-med, and I have no clue honestly how I would be able to be a doctor. Something like deafness is not typically seen as nearly as disabling as blindness. To the degree some deaf folks who are in particular culturally deaf do not consider themselves to be disabled or hold any identity in that. I have literally no way of debating that with anyone, I'm just saying what I have been told and seen. But I think blindness is commonly understood and accepted by the blind and sighted alike to be a pretty significant disability for most, and generally not preferred over having sight. That person seems misguided. She wants to be a champion for other people's rights, but she isn't quite sure how to do it properly. Best to ignore her. Calling a disability by what it is isn't offensive. No, it's the very definition of it.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. TooAfraidToAsk is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.